Our topic in health psychology for this week is breath. This is the first time I've introduced this content in health psychology classroom, although I've known about the importance of breath for around 30 years because of practices I began back 30 years ago related to breath and body work. I haven't had an opportunity to dive into the research on this until more recently. And increasingly, as our technology improves, we have more evidence about the essential understanding of the breath as it contributes to health. So we can think of the mind as the king of all the senses. The breath is the king of the mind. I'm going to start with some quotes from some ancient texts. This is dating 500 BCE. Sometimes we can learn more from the wisdom of the past and have it supported by the science of today. In transporting the breath, the inhalation must be full. When it is full, it has big capacity. When it has big capacity, it can be extended. When it is extended, it can penetrate downward. When it penetrates downward, it will become calmly settled. When it is calmly settled, it will be strong and firm. When it is strong and firm, it will germinate. When it germinates, it will grow. When it grows, it will retreat upward. When it retreats upward, it will reach the top of the head. The secret power of providence moves above. The secret power of earth moves below. He who follows this will live. He who acts against this will die. In Navajo traditions, the wind has a very important role, and this role has a number of levels according to my understanding. But one level is within the person, in which the wind equals breath equals soul. Nich-i, wind. Nich-i is considered the means of life. It represents not only a god or holy person, but also a means of communication, the act of breathing, and every Navajo's soul. The in-standing wind soul is acquired at birth and controls one's thoughts, speech, and actions. When a person's breath leaves them, he dies. That is, he loses the capacity to move. Without air in the body, the digestive and respiratory systems cannot function, the mind cannot think, and the body cannot produce sound or movement. The body has no inherent capacity for thought, speech, or movement. It acquires these capacities from air. A baby who never receives an in-standing wind soul does not live. And in Hindu teachings, breath does not just begin or support life. The breath is the totality of life. It is life, far beyond the simple movement of the lungs in the bodies of animals. Every single movement in the cosmos is a movement of Vishwaprana, the cosmic breath. In our own personal cosmos of the body and mind, including their subtle levels, nothing occurs that is not a movement of prana breath. Every life process is breath itself. Breath is the substance of which the inner and outer universe is constructed, as well as the power within it which causes it to move and live. Breath is all. The Sanskrit word for faith is wonderfully expressive. It is visvas. The common literal rendering, to breathe easy, have trust, be free from fear, does not convey the full meaning. Sanskrit svas refers to the motions of breath, implying thereby life and feeling. Vi conveys the meaning of opposite, without. That is, he whose breath, life, and feeling are calm. He can have faith born of intuition. The key points I hope to look over in this lecture that I'm making for the first time is to give you an overview of breath, to talk about nose breathing versus mouth breathing, to talk about nostril breathing, and then finally control of breathing. The respiratory system is how we generally think about it in the Western culture. The breath does have a mechanical process. In very brief overview, you will have already read about how oxygen enters the lungs, is transported through the lungs, finally to the alveoli, where molecules of oxygen attach to hemoglobin in red blood cells and transported to all the cells of the body. And you've maybe learned how carbon dioxide, which is the waste product of the cells, enters those same molecules, pries the oxygen molecules from the hemoglobin, and is then carried as waste back to the lungs where it's released for exhalation. Now, typically in Western medicine, this is what pulmonologists would be concerned with. They would focus on diseases of the breath, like emphysema, lung cancer, asthma, and other problems. But the vital functionality of the breath is what we're looking at here. And a couple of points that I'll simply make. First, observe that we have two channels for the breath, of course through the mouth, but then more ideally through the nose. And we'll talk about the importance of inhaling through the nose, why the nose should be the primary breathing apparatus rather than the mouth, which lacks the protective features of the nose. And note also that the lungs can expand a great deal. Note how deep they go. And very often we breathe quite shallow. We don't fill our lungs to capacity like partially filled balloons, and so we limit the extent to which the oxygen can be utilized from what we're inhaling into the lungs. And note finally the location of this diaphragm under the rings and under the ribs, and this diaphragm is the muscles that controls the inhale and exhale from the lungs. And so when we use our diaphragm to breathe, when we use this muscle, we'll see this air extending downwards, filling the lungs to capacity and filling the abdomen with the work of the diaphragm. So just make note of this little image of the vital regions of the lungs. So this book that I read was not the primary source, because I looked up the material that he shared in the book, but it was reading this book that kind of awoke me that there was science underpinning some of what I already known and experienced with relation to the breath. So I'm happy to be able to share it with you. It takes a long time to develop a good lecture, and I am not there yet developing this with you, so I don't feel I've shared even remotely what he has shared, but I encourage you to read this book. And I'm a pretty dedicated Audible book listener, and the Audible version of this book is equally good. We're looking at $10 or $15. I know that can sometimes be prohibitive. Sometimes you can find these books on YouTube and listen to them read aloud as an audiobook on YouTube. So I encourage you to look this way if this content interests you. So a little bit about the nose. So when we breathe through the nose, we have a function that we don't experience when we breathe through the mouth. The nose serves a few purposes. First of all, it cleans the air. So in that earlier image, you saw that there are these different regions behind the nose, behind the nostrils. So we inhale through the nostrils. We know we have hair and mucus inside the nose. Well, that mucus serves a really valuable purpose, as does the hair, in capturing impurities. And it's not just right inside the nose, but through like a shell, like the inside of a seashell, series of tubes before that air is taken into the lungs, where it continues to be cleaned, and the mucus is moved along through cilia, which are the hairs, eventually just dissolved in our digestive system. So it's got a great protective feature using the mucus. So we get cleaner air breathing through the nose. Secondly, it heats the air. So outside air is heated to an optimal body temperature for utilization in the body and for the retention of homeostasis, or the correct body temperature. Thirdly, it moistens the air because it's going through this long kind of tubular formation before entering the lungs. It adds a little humidity to dry air that is more easily utilized. And finally, when you inhale and exhale through the nose, it pressurizes the air, which actually allows more oxygen to be extracted from each breath. And just of a side note of interest, as someone with this uncomfortably long nose, myself, it's thought that people who came originally from cold climates, this long nose became adaptive because there's more room in there for the process of cooling the air that's coming in from the outside, which is beneficial to the body. And short, wider noses are more prevalent in people from warm, humid climates where the incoming air is already at an optimal temperature, so they can more efficiently take in oxygen that is at the right temperature. If you read deep into Nestor's book, the book that I shared with you, he talks quite a lot about the evolution of our facial structure in response to a variety of things related to our diets and to our tendencies or habits through child rearing that have allowed us to breathe through the mouth. So the nose has this important function, but we often in this culture tend to drop into mouth breathing. And why is this happening? Well, often it happens because there might be congestion or some blockage of the nasal passage, in part because of the narrowness of the nose and the shape of the palate of the mouth. And this would lead to the fact of the mouth breathing leads to a variety of problems. And so it can occur during the day or at night. Try and be conscious for a while in yourself of whether right now are you breathing through your mouth or breathing through your nose. And if you're breathing through your mouth, try to shift this immediately. You can open your nose a little more by pulling upward and outward on the nostrils to expand them a little bit, and try taking a deep breath through your nose. Just try to be more aware of this for a while, because when we breathe through the nose, because of that added air pressure, we're breathing deeper into our lungs, which activates a more relaxed nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. If we're breathing through our mouths, we're primarily utilizing the upper lungs, which is retaining sympathetic nervous system activation and adrenaline. If we then transfer this mouth breathing to our sleep, we will sleep more shallowly, and this shallow sleep, first off, we're getting a dry throat and mouth just for a basic problem with this mouth breathing. But we're also preventing the release of vasopressin, which is a hormone that serves a number of functions, but among them, it dictates to the kidneys whether it should be kind of reducing functionality for a while, not producing water output, or not creating the need for thirst. So if we don't have this release of vasopressin, then when we're trying to sleep, we're losing water, getting a little dehydrated there and being thirsty. And at the same time, the kidneys are continuing to release water just like they're awake, so we have to get up and urinate during the night. And that last bullet point is a repeat of the first two bullet points. Snoring, the open mouth breathing is leading to snoring and sleep apnea, which are periods of non-breathing, linked to a variety of conditions, and this is especially prevalent while sleeping on back, but also on stomach, as we see in the image. And so this decrease in sleep quality and quantity has far-reaching effects on health. There's actually quite a variety of effects that you'll learn in the videos that we're watching as well. Now, just one study that's starting to look at the impact of mouth breathing over nose breathing, and this was a study cited in the book, so I wanted to look up and see what was the actual study. So this is so Dr. John Dilliard suggests that we don't pant, and he's published this work It's not super well peer-reviewed, but there's increasing evidence that is. But I thought I'd share this one. And he just has done these experiments with professional cyclists, for example. And so he would have these cyclists in a trial ride for 20 minutes on stationary bikes. And on a stationary bike, you can increase the intensity. And they had to breathe completely through their mouth. And as this happened, the rate of breathing increased and the heart rate increased. But in the second trial, the same exercise with increasing intensity, but breathing entirely through nose, which sometimes as you're doing this, you have to maintain your nose open by pulling on the skin outside your nose, pulling outward with your fingers. Heart rate did not increase, and the rate of breathing decreased. And I found this so incredible that I tried this out myself on a hill that we have in Tucson called Tumamoc Hill that I like to walk up sometimes for just a little cardiovascular workout. It's pretty steep. Usually my heart rate increases, and usually I want my heart rate to increase because I'm trying to get aerobic exercise. But one time I walked up this whole hill and I kind of knew my heart rate because I've measured it on my phone. If you have an iPhone, you too have an app for easily measuring your heart rate. So I knew what my typical heart rate was. If I walk up this hill, when I get to the top, I'd usually take a measure. So one time I decided to look kind of ridiculous, and I walked up this entire hill while holding my nostrils open so that I wouldn't breathe through my mouth. And lo and behold, my heart rate did not increase. I felt like I had not even walked up that hill, which sort of annoyed me because I wanted my heart rate to increase, but it definitely lent credibility to me, to this experiment. And so I share it with you with the hopes that you might try something yourself. Do an activity, measure your heart rate if you have a phone. Do an activity that you are pretty familiar with and you know that your heart rate increases. And then just one time, try that very same activity while holding your nostrils open so that you ensure that you don't drop to breathing through your mouth, and see what happens. So again, I go to this ancient wisdom because my own practices in the yoga tradition and meditation traditions come from ancient teachings that often, even though our science doesn't yet have evidence, that doesn't mean they're not supported. So again, dating back to Genesis, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living soul, not into his mouth. Or the Chinese Taoist text from the 8th century, the nose is a heavenly door, and breath must be taken through it. The breath inhaled through the mouth is called Ni-Ip, adverse breath, which is extremely harmful. Never do otherwise than the nose, for breath would be in danger and illness would set in. And in looking this up to share with you, I find actual evidence of this in terms of mouth breathers being more susceptible to contracting COVID-19. So increasingly, these ancient wisdom gets support in modern science. So this is direct writing from Nestor's book. He is quoting, I did actually get this book by Catlin that he's describing. And Catlin has several books about this. So Catlin lived in the mid-1800s, and he was, I believe, an attorney. And then later he became a photographer in a very early time of photography. And he got tired of the work that he was doing, and he actually just left New York and decided to go live among the tribal people. And he ended up following Lewis and Clark's path and living with the tribes, the Plains tribes that are in like the Dakotas and the Midwest. And what he found was so surprising to him, he wrote in his book and his journals at that time, supported with photographs, that at their full growth, there were very few men who are less than 6 feet in stature, and very many of them 6.5 feet and others 7 feet tall, all seeming to share broad shoulders and barrel chests. The women were nearly as tall and just as striking. The average American at that time was 5 feet 8 inches. Non-Native American, I should say, or he should say. Despite never having seen a dentist or doctor, the tribal people had teeth that were perfectly straight, as regular as the keys of a piano, Catlin noted. Nobody seemed to get sick, and deformities and other chronic health problems appeared rare or non-existent. The tribes attributed their vigorous health to a medicine Catlin called the great secret of life. The secret was breathing. This is how they explained their good health. Breath inhaled through the mouth, Native Americans said, sapped the body of strength, deformed the face, and caused stress and disease. Breath inhaled through the nose kept the body strong, made the face beautiful, and prevented disease. Healthy nasal breathing started at birth. Mothers in all these tribes followed the same practices, carefully closing the baby's lips with their fingers after each feeding. At night, they'd stand over sleeping infants and gently pinch mouths shut if they opened. Through a variety of methods, children were trained to breathe through their noses all day, every day. They would carry the habit with them the rest of their lives. Catlin described how adult tribal members would even resist smiling with an open mouth, fearing some noxious air might get in. This practice was as old and unchangeable as their hills, he wrote, and it was shared universally throughout the Plains tribes for millennia. I haven't found evidence supporting or disagreeing with this being a practice in the Navajo or the tribes of this region, and so maybe some of you know about this. So we move on. As I said, this is a little bit of an awkward dexter. So that is supporting nose breathing versus mouth breathing. And I have a slide here that says the rate of breathing, and I think I didn't finish it. So I'm focusing on heart rate variability in this instead. And heart rate variability, the acronym is HRV. And I first learned about this studying in the psychophysiology lab at University of Arizona, where heart rate variability is a measure that they take as an indicator of trait anxiety. And people with higher trait anxiety, or they're anxious all the time, have low heart rate variability. And so heart rate variability is just the time difference between each suppressive heartbeat. So if you measure the time between heart rate 1, heart rate 2, heart rate 3, you see how much they vary across a certain time span. So if our heart rate is designed to vary to allow us to adapt to different circumstances. In fact, if we have higher heart rate variability, that is, our heartbeats have differences from one heartbeat to the next, that's linked to better physical performance, enhanced cognitive performance, relaxation, good sleep and recovery, lower risk of high blood pressure, and improved regulation of the autonomic nervous system. And the reverse of those characteristics are associated with low adaptability if our heart rate isn't adjusting a lot to our circumstance. In that case, we have imbalance in heart and mind, low spirit depression, can be down, we can have various health issues, we can be easily exhausted, and our bodies aren't going to function as well. Now, heart rate variability, this is sort of a repeat of this. This is just includes a picture of what a variable heart rate might look, right? 0.98 seconds on one beat, 0.93, 1.2, 1.3, varying like that. And I apologize for the repeated slide. But the point to make here is that our breath can impact heart rate variability. So this is just an example of what happens on the inhale and exhale. So when we have a good inhale, we have an increase in our heart rate, an increase in sympathetic nervous activation. It's slight, but it contributes to heart rate variability. And when we exhale, then we have this slowing of the breath. And so when we have deeper inhales and exhales, longer exhales, we're increasing our heart rate variability, which has all kinds of health impacts. We also have a natural nasal cycle. I don't know if you knew that our nostrils alternate every 1 hour to 4 hours in terms of which nostril is doing most of the inhaling. It seems to be related to alterations in natural congestion One nostril might be more congested at one time, therein capturing more impurities but less air coming in. And then after a while, that will switch and the other nostril will become more activated. And it's called the nasal cycle. And so again, a nasal cycle is the unconscious alternating partial congestion and decongestion of the nasal cavities in animals and humans. So nasal airflow as a consequence of this congestion will be greater in one nostril when it is in a low congestion phase. Airflow shifts will occur between the left and the right nostril over time. And this happens in all mammalian species that have been investigated. So what is the effect? Well, when we happen to be in a period where our dominant nostril is right nostril, we'll have more sympathetic activation and left brain stimulation. Our left brain is linked to logic and language. And so when the right nostril is active, the person might be slightly feeling more keyed up and have slightly improved logical language performance. When our left nostril is active, we have greater parasympathetic activation and greater right brain stimulation. And when our right brain is related to creative thought and spatial sense organization, and so when the right nostril is active, when the left nostril is active, a person has slightly increased spatial creative performance and a greater sense of relaxation. So we have differences in which nostril tends to be dominant for an individual. And usually it's balanced out, but we might have slightly greater in one than the other. But if that imbalance is really vast, sometimes we have psychological disorders. So for example, women in one study with unipolar depression had significantly more left nostril dominance. If women with bipolar depression had more right nostril dominance. Women with schizophrenia had greater left hemisphere activation, meaning their right brain might have been more active. And in one study with a small subject pool, women with schizophrenia who were taught to switch what nostril they were breathing through had a reduction in hallucinations linked to schizophrenia. So the problem is we don't know whether the condition, say the depression, contributed to the hemispheric abnormality or whether the breathing was abnormal and therein contributed to the condition. So that's a problem with these studies, but nevertheless it makes a difference. And I'm going to invite you, this video is posted, I'm going to be inviting you to try alternate nostril breathing and just observe how you feel. This is an 18-minute little activity that you should go through. And the final step is to think about whether we can control our breath. And I know that we can, but it's a very underutilized tool. And some of the video content this week will help you to see that. So free diving is diving for long periods under the water without air. So going really deep without any tank on your back or any way of getting air. But these free divers don't start out different from you or I. They train themselves to hold their breath for that long. They change the way their body uses oxygen. Yes, we can control our breathing. Fire breath is just another example. This is also linked to a video if it interests you. The Tumo breathing technique is a particular breathing technique that these monks other people can engage. It is not just these monks, but engaging this technique allows you to control your body temperature. And this is a 20-minute video of this monk walking barefoot, using this to this location, sitting down, using this technique for 20 minutes, being able to melt snow in his hands at the end of this and walk back home still without clothes because he's utilizing this particular breathing technique to control temperature. So our breath controls our body, our breath controls our mind, and we can control our breath. So you're going to be asked to do some little techniques, first assessing your own breathing, and then trying 3 techniques: breath awareness, deep breathing, and alternate nostril breathing. And I'll ask you how these went for you in our reflection this week.